Hi, it's Ben and/or a Bookish Bear here, and today my video is going to be based upon a book that I really enjoy, which is sort of going to be about my favorite books. This book is called My Ideal Bookshelf. So my ideal bookshelf is this really awesome book. This woman, Thessaly, she came up with this idea, and she sort of asked various authors and sort of famous people, actors, chefs, artists, all kinds of different people, to put together their ideal bookshelf and what that would look like. Jane Mount is the artist, and she kind of drew all of these cool book covers. So throughout the book is just a bunch of people who put together their ideal bookshelf, and then there's these really awesome drawings. Sorry about the glare of those shelves. My favorite in the book is, of course, Dave Eggers. And his books. So this book is really great if you love books and you're constantly trying to find new books and stuff like that. It's going to be really inspiring to you because it's literally just a book full of books that other people are recommending and talking about. So books that I have not heard of, some books that I have heard of. It's interesting to kind of go through and see which of the people in the book you kind of match with the best and have the most in common with. For me, anyways, that's interesting. So for the ideal bookshelf, I think they kind of aimed for 10 books. A lot of people went over, some did fewer, but I realized that when pulling books from my shelf to make up my ideal bookshelf, that I had more than 10 books. So I'm decided to break it into 2 videos. So the first video is going to be more about the books that I've reread and read the most throughout my life. So these are the books that I have read at least more than once, usually more than that. And the second one will be more about important books that, to me, that maybe I haven't read over and over and over, but are really important in different ways and for different reasons. So the second part will come up later. Another thing I noticed when pulling stuff is how male and white my ideal bookshelf is. And I do try to read diversely, and I tend to read stuff by lots of different kinds of people. And I think that that's really important, but I'm not going to put something on this list or shove something into my ideal bookshelf just to look more progressive or diverse. These are the books that matter to me, and I can't really help which books matter the most. So that's that. And here's part 1. So the first book I'm going to talk about is the book that I have probably read and reread the most in my life. When people ask me what my favorite book is, this is usually the book that I say, and it's usually the book that I recommend to people. It is Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close by Jonathan Safran Foer. This book is not only beautiful in the writing style and content, it's heartbreaking. It's just so many things that are so great. Talking about it, usually when I'm trying to explain it to people, I tend to tear and choke up because some of the emotional things that happen in this book are just so intense. The book is about a kid named Oscar, and within the first paragraph, you fall madly in love with Oscar. He's amazing. And you just want to know this kid. He's kind of odd in different ways. I don't know how else to explain him besides odd, but really precocious, really thoughtful. He's just a great character. As far as plot goes, so the plot of the book is Oscar's dad died in one of the towers on 9/11. And he and his dad used to play games while he was alive, like sort of treasure hunting game. His dad would plan out these like games for him and stuff. So he finds a note in a vase after his father passed, and he thinks that the note is a clue and part of a game. So he is going around New York trying to figure out where this key that he found goes to and what it unlocks. And so it's really sad. It's really beautiful. It's really funny. It's just so many different things, and I really recommend it. Jonathan Safran Foer, I believe, is just a really great writer, and there are parts of the book that the sentences are just incredible. The book is also odd in the way that it has photos throughout. It's sort of experimental in that way. And the photos, they go into the story in a way that I'm not going to spoil for anyone. But yeah, it's a really great book, and I highly recommend it. It's probably the book that I've reread the most. The next book is a book that I read almost every summer. I don't know why this is my kind of summer go-to book, but it's a book that I usually read once it warms up and gets hot. It's set during the summer, so I suppose that's why. But it's The Mysteries of Pittsburgh by Michael Chabon. Michael Chabon is also a writer that I really enjoy. I've read a few of his books and want to read more. So this is just sort of, it's kind of a retelling of The Great Gatsby. It's this kind of love triangle-y book, a coming-of-age story. I'm not going to give anything else away. It's really good, and it's a great summer read, so I suggest reading it. It's pretty awesome. The next book is also one of my favorites. I read this book almost every winter. I haven't read it this winter yet, so I probably should soon, but I also need to read it when I'm sad. It's a really sad book. It's A Single Man by Christopher Isherwood. I do have the movie cover copy, which is lame, I know, but it is what it is. So this book is amazing. It's about a gay man. He loses his partner, and then he's just sort of dealing with that. It's about sort of a day in his life, and he goes throughout the day. It's just got a lot to say about the sort of facades we put on as people, and how we tend to act and react to grief. It says a lot about, I think, sort of the facades we put on and the masks we wear and how we feel like we need to do that. I think if you couple that with the idea that of this toxic sort of masculinity that says, we shouldn't feel as men, and that's disgraceful and all those things, which is stupid. But I think if you couple it, but if you sort of read that into it as well, it just becomes even more heartbreaking. It's just, like I said, it's a really sad book, sort of about grief. So if you're not in a really great place in your life, you might not want to read it if you're feeling emotionally vulnerable. But you should read it. It's beautifully written. Christopher Isherwood is one of the writers in my life that has been really influential. And you should read all of his stuff. He wrote a few stories, which are referred to as the Berlin stories, which later inspired Cabaret, the movie and musical. So he's pretty awesome. You should check him out if you have not read any Christopher Isherwood. The next book is by one of my favorite writers who happens to be mostly a nonfiction writer. He wrote a novel, which I actually haven't read yet, but I've read a bunch of his nonfiction work. His name is David Shields, and this book is called Reality Hunger. This book is incredible and mind-blowing. Every time I read it, I just go away feeling like a different writer. I feel like I feel completely different about art and what it means. So Reality Hunger is it's described as a manifesto on the cover. In Reality Hunger, David Shields sort of looks into this idea that it was released in 2010. He looks into this idea that we're sort of obsessed with reality. TV or YouTube, things like this becoming really popular and taking off, like people just watching people make videos online, reality TV, all those sorts of things. And the reason that we're so obsessed with those is culturally and as people, individually as humans, is because we yearn for things that are real. We yearn for something that is authentic because we don't see it very often in society and in culture, which is an interesting idea. So he sort of takes it a step further and mentions and talks about and argues even that narrative fiction is sort of boring. And he's really sort of anti the idea of someone just sitting down and making stuff up. That sort of idea of a novel, which is what we have come to understand the novel to be. So he talks a lot about different forms of art and different forms of writing and those kind of places in literature where the two merge, and how he finds that really interesting, and that he thinks as we go forward, more and more people are going to find that more and more interesting, and that's sort of where the novel is going, to this sort of blurred reality of what is true and what isn't true, which again is very interesting. The first time I read it, I was like, I'm never making stuff up again. And it really influenced me in a huge way. I feel like I'm older now and can sort of sparse and take things from it beyond just that, and make my own decisions, and maybe probably will write, made up fiction, but whatever. So it's just really, really interesting, and I really, really suggest it if you're a writer at all. If you're interested in literature, you're going to learn a lot from it. You're also going to step away from it with a long list of books you probably want to read, because he just lists lots of different books and stuff that kind of fit these categories and that he finds interesting, and I know that I did, and it led me to some books that I really, really love, and authors that I really, really love. This is a book that I try to make everyone read, and no one ever reads it, because I'm not sure why, but it's so, so good. So please read Reality Hunger. The next book is one that I had a hard time deciding which video to put it in, the video where I've read these books a million times and know them really well, or they're important to me because it sort of fits in both categories. And it is The Complete Poems of Stephen Crane. So not a lot of people know Stephen Crane as a poet. He wrote The Red Badge of Courage. I think that he's one of those writers that we sort of have to read Red Badge of Courage or hear about Red Badge of Courage in middle or high school, and then sort of write him off as just some dude that we have to read in high school and no one ever pays attention to after that. But he's written lots of really great short stories and stuff. I personally have not read The Red Badge of Courage, but I have read his poems endlessly, and I have read a bunch of his short stories, and he's a really fantastic writer. This set of poems is sort of a book of poems that kind of changed my life in a weird way. I pulled it off a shelf at Barnes & Noble probably 10 or more years ago, randomly, and just flipped through it, randomly read stuff, and was obsessed, and just sat there and read it while my friends were doing whatever. And eventually they came over and were like, hey, we're leaving, so I had to leave. Didn't buy it for whatever reason. Every time I went to Barnes & Noble, I would pull off the shelf and read through it, and not purchase it for whatever reason. Eventually I got my own copy and read it endlessly, like I said. The poems are really great, and he writes very short poems, which are the kind of poems that I tend to write when I write poetry. Most of mine are pretty short. The thing about Stephen Crane's poetry is he's just really good at putting a really huge idea or a really huge feeling into just a few simple words. He's so succinct and intentional with his words. He's just brilliant as far as I'm concerned. He's one of the poets that have influenced me the most. And I just really recommend reading his poems because they're amazing. And the last book that I'm going to talk about in this section is a book that I have read through quite a bit. She's probably my favorite short story writer. I think that she's absolutely brilliant. This is a book that I'm probably going to talk about on this channel often, and you might get sick of it eventually. I'm okay with that, as long as you read it and give it a chance. So it's The Collected Stories of Lydia Davis. Lydia Davis is amazing. Her style is so simple and neat and breathtaking at times. The first time I read this, I was taking a trip to go see my family, and took a train, and I randomly bought this in a store just based on the look of the book, because it's smaller and it's pretty, and I thought it was awesome, and I opened it and read some stuff and was interested, so I bought it. I took it on this trip with me, and so I started reading it, and it was just mind-blowing. how good it was. And I'm looking around and there's no one on this train that's going to be interested. And it's mind blowing. I'm freaking out and I want to tell everyone on the train about how great this book is, and no one cares. No one's going to care. So I'm just sitting there having like a mind blown moment with Lydia Davis tweeting about it, and upset with myself because this is only a few years ago. Upset with myself that I had never read Lydia Davis before or even heard of her, and didn't know why everyone wasn't always talking about her because she's so great. So these stories are some of them are kind of experimental and short and sweet, and some of them are really just in-depth looks at people and women in general, and specifically, which is something you don't get a lot of in literature, just these really complicated, complex female characters written by a woman, that seem real and genuine and just really interesting to read. My very favorite short story is probably this one called The Houseplans, which is about this guy who sort of works this job he hates, saves up, and then sells everything to buy this plot of land to build a home on out in the country. And it's just a haunting story. My favorite short stories tend to be these stories that I usually don't enjoy the first time I read them, and then they just sort of haunt me and stick in my mind. And I can't get them out of my mind, and I have to read them every once in a while. So sometimes I just have to read this story. It's called The Houseplans, and it's in her first book of stories called Break It Down. So this is kind of three or four collections of stories in this book. She also wrote a novel, but she's excels at the short story. So please read this book, or any of her short stories, because they're amazing. So those are some of my very favorite books that I read over and over, books that have been really influential and important in my life. The next video, like I said, will be part 2 and even more books that I feel that way about. So I'm excited to talk about those as well. If you have any questions or comments or want to talk about any of these books with me, let me know and we can do that. And thanks for watching.